Hello everyone, and welcome to the introductory episode of UAP as NHI. This podcast will standardize the approach to ufology in a comprehensive manner that will also promote positive discourse and help bring the UFO community together. I'm going to demonstrate why the UAP topic does not rely on what you, I, or anyone else believes, and will instead put the focus on what the available evidence might suggest, independent of personal conviction. Let's get started. The opening theme is Restore, and the artist is Donvor. I'm your host, Bill Sego, and today's episode will preview upcoming topics and outline what the show is all about. Be sure to visit uapasnhi.com to check out the member forum and join in the discussion. Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon as Non-Human Intelligence is a podcast program and YouTube channel that incorporates philosophical inquiry, scientific reasoning, and logical deduction of the UAP phenomenon to evaluate an overall level of probability as it relates to non-human intelligence. The show will also highlight reasons why scientists and skeptics are barking up the wrong tree when they demand physical or testable evidence as proof for the existence of non-human intelligence, and that this is not a necessity when deducing whether or not UAP as NHI is probable. I'm going to provide listeners with a worksheet that anyone can use to evaluate the actual probability value of any UAP case in history, another that deduces the validity of any UAP video ever captured, and yet another that calculates from where this intelligence most likely originates. I'm also going to highlight why the UFO community continues heading down the wrong path and how to get it back on track. Everything featured on this program will appear in more detail in a future publication currently in the works titled UAP as NHI, Probability versus Certainty, which I've been working on for the past year and a half in my spare time. My first book, Universal Logic, A Quest for the Meaning of Life, is linked on the website. While it is available to purchase on Amazon, I provide exclusive links to download the free audiobook version so that you don't have to purchase a physical copy. In it, I devote an entire chapter to the UAP topic as sort of a precursor to my upcoming publication. I know what you're thinking. This is just what we need, yet another UFO podcast. But I promise, this one will be quite different and aims to help usher in a new era with a unique approach to the subject matter. Ufology is in dire need of renaissance. In order to propel the study forward and for it to have any chance of earning credibility by the scientific community, the UFO community must revamp its approach to the topic. It has to find a way to get everyone on the same page regardless of our differences or personal convictions. While each of us harbors our own unique ideas regarding the phenomenon and its true nature, that does not need to get in the way of finding a happy medium approach that promotes unity among all members of the community. While I'm no expert or authority on the topic, I do offer some unique insight that might provide listeners with a fresh perspective. The overall theme of the show is basically a philosophical examination of the phenomenon as opposed to a case study that rehashes the same redundant perspectives and talking points for the same UAP cases. I make no definitive claims, but I do provide a basic grading system that can be applied to any case throughout history. The primary goal of this worksheet is to assess a non-human intelligence probability value of the phenomenon without the need for claims of scientific fact or absolute truth. The majority of best cases throughout history and around the world already feature countless books, documentaries, and podcast programs exhaustively outlining the details of each. While the upcoming book will feature specific data points for some of the best cases on record, the goal is merely to construct a grading system based on specific categories of evidence to determine the probability of each as they relate to the potential involvement of NHI. It matters not whether one believes in UFOs or UAP, whatever you wish to call them. It's not a question of faith or opinion anyway. They absolutely do exist. The question of whether some of these objects were manufactured by a non-human intelligence, however, remains a subject of debate. With that question in mind, do some of the best documented cases present enough evidence to determine a general likelihood of NHI? Is that combined set of data convincing enough to warrant assigning a high level of overall probability that the phenomenon is otherworldly or of non-human origin? Again, this will be an examination that deals in likelihoods and probabilities, not in scientific fact or hard evidence. Those absolutions are unattainable at present. However, hard evidence is not a necessity if we're merely deducing a level of probability that might suggest the phenomenon is not us. This endeavor will combine philosophical exploration, scientific reasoning, logical deduction, process of elimination, historical evidence, and anecdotal testimony in order to deduce answers for the phenomenon that need not claim scientific certainty. One can still deduce a best answer for something based on those combined methods of obtaining truth without claiming absolute fact. Scientific evidence as it relates to the UAP enigma is lacking at present. No hard data or consensus proof of non-human craft has ever surfaced. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't any suppressed evidence that does exist somewhere, just that the general public doesn't have access to it. I'm not claiming this is the case, just presenting the possibility based on seemingly credible eyewitness testimony and a literal mountain of different types of evidence. A question of probability, on the other hand, is presently attainable and may be the necessary starting point to move the conversation forward. After all, countless examples of evidence that appear to suggest no natural or mundane explanation certainly do exist and should be more closely examined by those with the means to do so. The following should be the prevailing question. Is there strictly an earthly or mundane explanation for every single case presented throughout history, or do a small percentage of them leave at least room for the possibility of non-human intelligence? If scientists or skeptics actually looked closely at select cases rather than cherry-picking data points that support a strictly mundane explanation, one would think they would at least consider this possibility. Otherwise, they are merely adhering to the status quo, sticking to their guns, and turning a blind eye. One could speculate this is either out of sheer stubbornness, fear of academic ridicule, or because they have already dug their heels in too far. Episode 2 of the program will be what I call the 10 Rules of Engagement in Ufology. In Episode 2, I will be discussing a 10-step approach to the topic that the UFO community might find useful in order to move the study forward in a positive and productive manner. All of us complain about how the community is fractured and needs to come together in order to advance the study, but so far, nobody has made any real effort to devise a comprehensive means of doing so. It's time that changed. First and foremost would be for all of us to avoid expressing our personal opinions on the topic. It's not the job of the ufologist to convince a skeptic or the public in general that, quote, UFOs are real. The goal should instead be to present the evidence based on how probable or not the individual case may be and leave it at that. Even if someone asks you directly whether or not you believe in UFOs or think they're real, your immediate response should be that this topic is not a matter of faith or belief. That goes for whether or not you believe in specific cases or eyewitnesses as well. Anyone can harbor a useless opinion regarding what he or she thinks is going on. It doesn't matter what you, I, or anyone else thinks about the phenomenon. That is purely inconsequential. A more appropriate answer would be something like, it appears the evidence points to such and such, or the available evidence suggests this or that level of probability. Answers that begin with I believe or I think should be avoided at all cost and stricken from our vocabulary. This especially applies to those in the scientific and skeptical communities who also weigh in on the topic. They too should refrain from providing their personal opinion and instead stick to answers that focus on the available evidence or lack thereof. Now, of course, everyone is entitled to have an actual opinion as to how they interpret the evidence, and all of us will occasionally slip up and use language that is a natural part of our vocabulary. But we should at least work at it. And remember that providing opinions regarding this topic should be reserved for private discussions among peers or colleagues. Personal opinions shared with the public, on the other hand, merely muddy the waters. They are absolutely the root of all the discord and infighting within the UFO community. Another rule should be to suspend judgment and simply let the evidence work itself out. Before dismissing or accepting an account at face value, allow the evidence to progress naturally without jumping to conclusions either for or against a particular account. If a whistleblower comes forward with a claim, our first reaction shouldn't be, she's a liar, or he's a disinformation agent, or what they're saying must be true. Instead, we should be willing to let the evidence and testimony play out until we have enough information to evaluate responsibly. I get that most in the community are tired of waiting for answers, but this approach is essential until we have a broader picture, even if it takes years or decades. This rule should also apply to video footage, supposed government documents, and purported physical evidence that all have yet to be fully or properly analyzed. Some recent examples include the testimony of David Grush, the accounts given by Lou Elizondo, and the results of the physical evidence obtained from the so-called Nazca mummies that have yet to be fully analyzed. A third rule should be to abstain from ridicule or personal attacks. Anyone that provides eyewitness testimony for any UAP account should neither be judged nor ridiculed, regardless of how outlandish or ridiculous the report might appear to you. Even if there is clear evidence of a hoax or deception, simply present that supporting evidence to the general population in a straightforward manner, provide reasons why the account is improbable, and move on to the next case. People are going to lie and fabricate, and some are just plain delusional. However, that does not give us the right to go on the attack. Not only does this avoid hurting someone who could be telling the truth as they believe it to be, but it also avoids making you look like a jerk. The same rule applies to peers in the community who might harbor a different interpretation of the phenomenon. It's okay to disagree with someone, but it's not okay to publicly disparage or attack them. This accomplishes nothing. These are just a few examples of how we can take the high road, set the standard for our fellow skeptic, and remove emotion from the equation. The other rules will be outlined in more detail during the next episode. UAP and errors in scientific reasoning. The third episode will feature flaws, inconsistencies, and unfair assessments made about this topic by some in the skeptical and scientific communities. These are not deficiencies in the scientific method itself, rather flaws made by academics who approach the subject incorrectly. The scientific method is undoubtedly the best tool we have for understanding the nature of the universe as it applies to present-day humanity. But is it the only valid formula, and should it be the sole method for distinguishing fact from fiction? Is it really the only worthy approach to uncovering a truth? While the scientific method is a timeless pursuit designed to transcend our current understanding of reality, the field of science itself has only existed for about 200 years, a mere blip on the cosmic scale. Has science amassed enough evidence to confidently assess how the universe truly operates? Do scientists really know the limits of technology? Furthermore, has humanity evolved enough to genuinely understand the true nature of reality? Are the technological tools we've developed since that time advanced enough to provide adequate answers about the universe's structure or what is and isn't possible within that framework? Could scientists benefit from integrating additional truth-seeking methods in order to supplement its current methodologies with other ways of assessing the probability of mysteries that science may not unravel in our lifetime? Or should we remain patient and let science progress naturally, accepting our perpetual ignorance? Perhaps we could introduce a level of probability based on available evidence without claiming scientific truth or fact, allowing us to explore or contemplate such mysteries now while suspending ultimate judgment. Regarding the UAP question, is there enough available evidence to deduce a likelihood of any part having merit in non-human origins? Is there a method of discovery able to deduce such probabilities now? Or will strict adherence to scientism hinder our openness to even exploring such possibilities? Does the phrase extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence even apply to the UAP topic if the search for answers regarding potential non-human involvement makes no claims of scientific fact or absolute truth? If the UFO community is able to amend its approach to the topic by merely suggesting a level of probability, or even high possibility, does that not negate the need for any extraordinary claim in the first place? After all, a proposition is not necessarily a claim. I will highlight specific flaws in how scientists and skeptics approach the question, or factors that hinder an honest and thorough assessment of the subject matter. Some of these may be caused by the Dunning-Kruger effect, or cognitive bias, the giggle factor, ontological shock, scientific dogmas and scientism, confirmation bias, what Dr. J. Allen Hynek called the committee complex, flaws in the peer review process, the superfluous speed of light barrier argument as though it's a requirement for interstellar mobility, heterodoxy, the glaring conflict of interest position, notably among SETI researchers and proponents, inevitable future paradigm shifts in scientific understanding, especially regarding alternative means of propulsion, and hypocritical tolerance of hypotheses with less supportive evidence, such as ideas of a multiverse, simulated universe, wormholes, and more. I remain intrigued by how scientists and skeptics completely dismiss or scoff at the argument when there is a huge body of evidence to review without necessarily making any judgment or determination. Ignoring evidence or dismissing accounts offhand is irresponsible and unscientific given the implications of such a reality. I will say this about some skeptics, despite my criticisms. They keep the UFO community on its toes. Without skeptics to put us in check, what purpose would ufologists really have? Michael Shermer, Mick West, Brian Dunning, and others in that camp certainly have no popularity among UAP proponents, but they are approaching the topic in a manner they deem appropriate. I happen to like Michael Shermer as a person and thoroughly enjoy his podcast, even if I disagree with some of his approach to the subject matter. It's always healthy to at least entertain the opposing position and appreciate the balance that it offers. Episode 4, Special. SPECIAL is an acronym for a special method of reviewing and interpreting evidence since it utilizes multiple approaches to seeking a truth. These methods include scientific reasoning, philosophical inquiry, evidentiary standard, chronicled accounts, invalidation or process of elimination, anecdotal evidence, using a qualitative phenomenological approach, and finally, logical deduction. This combined approach offers a unique perspective on the UAP topic by blending different forms of evidence gathering and interpretation. Exploring an unknown that does have supportive evidence may require such an approach, especially concerning aspects of a phenomenon we may be biologically, evolutionarily, or scientifically incapable of fully understanding at this time. When combined, these methods provide a comprehensive approach to solving a mystery that acts as a first step to getting closer to a particular truth. This combination could provide a broader view of the study and help determine if we have the right to be intellectually confident in the existence of non-human intelligence on Earth. I may also include an additional supplementary episode that features questions intended for skeptics or scientists. I started compiling a list of Catch-22 inquiries that anyone can ask of them on their social media platforms or in an interview setting, intended to highlight potential errors in scientific reasoning regarding this topic. If so, that episode will appear following episode 4. Episode 5 will feature the NHI probability worksheet. I'm currently working on a chart that categorizes 5 levels of probability based on various aspects of evidence for any given case. These include highly probable, probable, possible, improbable, and highly improbable. This worksheet will assign a fair amount of negative and positive point values based on factors such as the number and credibility of eyewitnesses, proximity to the sighting, the various characteristics of the sighting, if there was accompanying video or radar data, potential for hoax or deception, presence of any physical evidence, any documentation, possible natural explanations, likelihood of mundane craft, and much more. Each anomalous aspect of an object's characteristics and maneuvers is also included within the grading system. Since the chart will still be in development at the time of the episode's release, a rough draft will be presented in order for audience members to critique, provide feedback for missing or unnecessary points of evidence, and to leave room for revisions that will be accredited in the book for whoever contributes. Feedback and constructive criticism is essential. The next step would be to run Bayesian statistical models to obtain actual probability percentages. This episode will be featured much later in the program since there is a significant amount of math to be worked out. The website features a forum discussion for this endeavor in order to solicit feedback or probability models from members. Specific priors and data points will be provided later to help get started. Observables. Episode 6 will cover the various observable aspects of the phenomenon to include visual, auditory, olfactory, and tactile. Although Lou Elizondo has outlined what he calls the 5 observables, the various anomalous characteristics feature many more based on a comprehensive look at all the best cases throughout history. Some of those that will be discussed on this episode include craft structure and shape, anti-gravity lift and propulsion, characteristics of lights and metallic reflections, cloaking, camouflage, morphing, time dilation, hypersonic velocities without signatures, certain odors, sounds, textures, spirals and portals, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, and transmedium travel. Although our biological senses are not always a reliable source of obtaining a truth, I'm going to present specific instances where this tired excuse cannot be applied to many of the credible cases out there, and provide logical arguments why. Mundane explanations. Episode 7 will cover errors in UAP observation, and I'm sure many will consider this topic less interesting than others discussed on the program. However, I'm going to show why these cases should have no bearing on the overall data set. Some of the more prosaic sightings mistaken for UAP include various forms of natural phenomena, insects, planes, balloons, drones, satellites, planets, possible advanced human technology by a military power or private contractor, camera anomalies, optical illusions, mass hysteria, and lies or hoaxes. The majority of so-called sightings likely fall under one of these interpretations, but should they really be considered actual UAP cases in the first place? What should be stressed is that these cases should be summarily dismissed from any comparison of the data. There are enough cases out there that remain unexplained to simply ignore those that obviously harbor a prosaic interpretation. Just because someone claims they saw a UFO does not mean it should be included with the overall data set when it can be preemptively determined to be a hoax or misidentification. Simply plug the numbers into the probability worksheet for whatever case you choose, determine which cases fall under the improbable or highly improbable value set, and pitch them into the waste bin. I'm going to present sound reasoning why including such reports for determining an overall level of probability for NHI is incidental and counterproductive when trying to find an honest answer for UAP. I'm also going to show why it's misleading for skeptics to focus on these errors in observation as though it's grounds to dismiss or ignore cases that are actually unexplainable. Episode 8, UAP Video Probability Worksheet. A worksheet similar to the NHI probability chart for specific cases will also be featured for specific UAP videos. Point values will be based on factors such as if there was any accompanying documented evidence, real-time reactions of witnesses during recording, video testimonials of eyewitness observation, independent visual analysis of body language, multiple eyewitnesses with accompanying testimonials, the overall authenticity of the recording, what year the video was recorded, whether there was any professional analysis to determine CGI or other mundane explanations, and if it was recorded during a live broadcast, among others. The goal of this worksheet is also to determine a level of probability for NHI. I will demonstrate why UAP videos are just as, if not more important than actual UAP cases, regardless of how easy they might be to fake. They are the window into the phenomenon. They're for everyone to observe. Once those that are suspect or obviously hoaxed are eliminated from the conversation, a large body of documented evidence will remain. Someone will eventually put in the work to weed out the noise, and AI will eventually become complex enough to fully analyze these videos. Ignoring this wealth of evidence just because there are fakes out there would be a wasted opportunity. Episodes 9 through 12 will each cover the extraterrestrial hypothesis, ultraterrestrial hypothesis, interdimensional hypothesis, and extratempestrial model, culminating with episode 13, the origin likelihood chart. If a high probability of non-human intelligence being present on our planet is ultimately determined, the question then arises: are they aliens from another planet, evolved humans from the future, intelligent life forms that evolved on Earth millions of years ago, or interdimensional beings from another realm entirely? A side note: the term alien does not necessarily equate to extraterrestrial. Any intelligent non-human life form will essentially be alien or otherworldly to us, even an evolved form of humanity from the distant future that might resemble the typical gray. Baggage or not, alien is not an inappropriate term for any form of non-human intelligence. Once all cases deemed as hoaxes, mundane phenomena, or natural occurrences are eliminated as improbable or highly improbable, an additional worksheet will be developed for points of evidence regarding cases that fall under probable or highly probable. This worksheet will deduce the likelihood of origin for each characteristic associated with those cases. A simple point value of 1 through 4 will be assigned to each possibility based on the likelihood for each potential origin source using 2 of the special methods: logical deduction and invalidation, commonly known as process of elimination. The 4 primary origin possibilities considered are the extraterrestrial hypothesis, ETH, or aliens from another planet, the extratempestrial model, ETM, or humans from the future, the ultraterrestrial hypothesis, UTH, or an advanced civilization from Earth, and the interdimensional hypothesis, IDH, or beings from another dimensional reality. While there are more specific subsets, such as demons and angels or transuniversal simulation architects, these examples would fall under the broader interdimensional hypothesis possibility. Similarly, interpretations of avatars, AI, or synthetic biological beings would all fall under the extraterrestrial hypothesis, since the ultimate source of origin would be aliens from another planet who created or manufactured them. Of course, AI or synthetic biological intelligence could also be manufactured by future humans or ultra-terrestrials, but you get the idea. The UTH episode will provide different reasons for its likelihood to include the ancient alien hypothesis, Silurian hypothesis, cryptids, underground bases, significance of active volcanoes, unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, and structures on the moon, to name a few. While these specific ideas may not necessarily signify a definite ultra-terrestrial origin, on the surface they do suggest the most likely interpretation for it. To get at the heart of it, we must apply the "if it walks like a duck" line of reasoning for simple deduction. The IDH episode will cover aspects that include high strangeness, cosmic consciousness, transuniversal architects, aka simulation hypothesis, paranormal phenomenon, portals, gods, angels, and demons, and others. While many will argue that some of these possibilities should feature their own distinct interpretation, I'm going to present reasons why they all fall under the broader interdimensional category. It must also be noted that the entire concept of so-called interdimensional is a human one. We must ask ourselves the following: what does interdimensional really mean in the first place? Are we merely multiplying additional unknowns for what is actually a three-dimensional phenomenon that we haven't evolved enough to accurately observe or understand? Are we labeling a foreign three-dimensional technology as interdimensional because it is so advanced that it merely appears magical? The ETM episode will feature the nature of time, the now, time travel possibilities, ideas presented by Dr. Michael Masters, alternate reality versions of humans or other evolved life forms who can traverse different three-dimensional realms, and how time operates in an infinite universe versus block universe versus the Big Bang. Whether or not you think time travel will ever be technologically achievable, this model remains a valid point of origin possibility. The ETH episode will start off with discussing the sheer number of stars and planets in our galaxy and how prevalent intelligent life might be. While the universe hosts an exponential number of additional stars and planets, the primary focus will deal exclusively with the Milky Way. That is the model that will be used to calculate the potential number of intelligent races capable of traversing our galaxy. The humanoid model as an efficient embodiment for interstellar mobility will also be weighed. This idea is likewise supported by the notion of divergent evolution theory. I will weigh in on other factors as they pertain to this argument, such as the speed of light barrier, Fermi paradox, and Dyson spheres. AI, synthetic biological constructs, and the relatively short amount of time it would take for an ancient civilization to visit every life-supporting star system in the galaxy using conventional propulsion will serve as potential reasons why distance need not be an obstacle for full galactic exploration. The plethora of different types of nuts and bolts craft, the numerous types of entities reported by some of the more credible cases, and why a conceivable technology able to camouflage or distort the appearance of a physical craft will serve as examples of why the ETH is still a strong contender for NHI likelihood. But how does it really stack up against the other interpretations? Episode 13 may provide some answers. In Episode 13, the Origin Likelihood Chart, I will feature a basic 4-point grading system based on a process of elimination and logical deduction analysis of around 50 to 100 different points of observation found in various cases throughout history. For example, one point of observation could be the broad high strangeness category, with other more specific instances of high strangeness also featured. On this particular line, 4 points would be factored for IDH, since anything potentially interdimensional with the ability to be observed by us would, at its core, be highly strange. 3 points would be given to ETM, since the effects of time travel would also appear strange to us, but not as strange as what an interdimensional craft might exhibit. 2 points for ETH, since any alternative means of propulsion would appear strange to Earthbound scientists, but not as strange as the previous 2 observations. 1 point for UTH, since an advanced civilization that requires no means of time travel, exotic propulsion, or interdimensional portal would be required, since they are already here. Another significant point of observation would be the physical nuts and bolts aspect. As a side note, similar observations would include the many different types or models of physical craft, other observations of anomalies in the sky seemingly not physical, the many types of beings witnessed, and more, but those are all unique observations that will appear on the chart within their own specific data point. This observation point is an example where assigning point values can be arbitrary. The ETH, UTH, and ETM all require a physical component, with none seeming to take precedence over the other, at least none that I could see. There may be no competing argument that would award more or less points to any of those, which would result in a 3-way tie. So the nuts and bolts aspect would be an example where an equal number of points may be awarded to multiple observation sets. If so, then 4 points would be awarded to each of those 3. The IDH, on the other hand, would be given 1 point, since it could be argued that an interdimensional craft would not be physical in the sense that beings on our plane of existence could actually observe, measure, or touch, let alone re-engineer. Something interdimensional should be completely foreign to our senses or methods of observation. While that isn't a definitive claim, we are forced to break down each argument and distribute points based on what appears more likely on the surface. In other words, it's all we have to work with at this time. After all significant observations of the phenomenon are logically deduced and given process of elimination values, simple addition for each category would provide an overall value that determines which point of origin is more likely than the others. While this may provide a very basic level of overall origin likelihood, it's a good starting point that makes it easy for the general population to participate. I will then incorporate more complex ideas for how the worksheet might be later restructured. Many interpretations of the various observations made are arbitrary, so I need your help to work out the best arguments of deduction. Or feel free to use the worksheet as a template to formulate your own probability formula, since I certainly don't have a patent on it. Once this episode airs and the rough draft of the chart is posted, feedback will be solicited in the member forum on the website for any who might want to contribute. The following topics will appear in no determined order. The 10 degrees of disclosure. During this episode, I will outline 10 specific levels or degrees of disclosure, what each entails, and what level we are currently at. Ideas like Big D disclosure and catastrophic disclosure will also be clarified, as well as direct and indirect disclosure. With indirect disclosure, there is also forced and unforced. This mash of jumbled terms compelled me to develop a more simplified 10-level structure. What are the implications of a high degree of disclosure? How would members of the scientific and skeptical communities be viewed by the media and general population compared to researchers in the UFO community should proof of non-human intelligence ever surface? In the event of irrefutable disclosure, would a premature denial by skeptics affect their credibility? Would some of them run and hide from the media if pressed for a reason why they took this initial position? Would disclosure open the floodgates for all sorts of wild conspiracy theories? And could we rightfully blame the scientific community since they prematurely labeled the topic of UAP as one? Would this ultimately affect people's confidence in science, even though scientists, not science itself, would be to blame? Another episode will feature completed probability worksheets for a handful of infamous cases that show how probable or improbable they really are. In the upcoming book, roughly 50 of the most notable cases throughout history will be graded using the probability worksheet. This includes cases that either defy scientific explanation or have been debunked as natural phenomenon or hoaxes. These cases will be divided among 4 sections. Each will feature specific points of evidence based on general consensus among the UFO community. Established databases of these details will also be referenced and sources specified. This won't be a rehashing or retelling of each case, but strictly a short list of the specific data points as they relate to the probability worksheet, along with a very brief description. The first of these chapters will feature famous cases prior to the modern era of the phenomenon, or those from ancient times through 1941. The next will feature cases from 1942 through 1999. After that will be those from 2000 through 2025. The final section featuring these cases will be a mix of ones that are infamous or noteworthy, not necessarily probable. Due to obvious time constraints, the episode will feature only a handful of these cases applied to the probability worksheet to see where they might stack up. Anomalies in space and anomalous structures on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. While I will be discussing anomalous structures that seemingly appear on Earth and the Moon within the UTH episode, this episode will feature a more in-depth discussion that highlights specific structures, NASA photographs and footage pertaining to the theme of the program, photographs of the Moon featuring structures later airbrushed out, eyewitnesses who worked for the agency, and sightings made by astronauts throughout history. It will also cover reports of underground bases, USOs, and more. Physical evidence. This episode will cover topics that include crop circles, angel hair, radiation burns, cattle mutilations, anomalous metamaterials, implants, and other forms of purported physical evidence. Question is, are any of these reports substantiated physical evidence of an NHI presence? Either way, should physical evidence really be a necessary component for deducing a level of probability, since established evidence would skip any notion of a theory and immediately propel the hypothesis to an absolute truth? Contactees, abductees, and experiencers. Betty and Barty Hill, George Adamski, Billy Meyer, Travis Walton, Whitley Strieber, and other notable figures surrounding this aspect of the topic will be discussed as it pertains to the theme of the program. Bud Hopkins and his role in the worldwide exposure of abductees will also be covered. While no abduction case has ever been proven as absolute fact, it could be argued that if we are being visited by any kind of humanoid intelligence, they would likely do more than just observe us from craft flying around in our atmosphere. Any intelligence expending resources to get here from another reality, star system, or time period would surely not settle for simply making an expensive sightseeing trip to the zoo. They may even have reason to infiltrate our population, as a recent Harvard study claims is possible, potentially using synthetic or altered human DNA gathered during such abductions to do so. Much speculation surrounds direct contact, and if there is any truth to it, all we can do at this time is formulate ideas for how and why. Government documents. In this episode, I will be discussing FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, John Greenwald Jr., the MJ-12 documents, the Truman Memo, the Wilson Davis Memo, ARROW, OSAP, ATIP, the UAP Task Force, and other related topics. Agencies such as MUFON, NICAP, CUFOS, and others will be covered since these groups also collect information and document cases. Project Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, and the Condom Report will also be featured as they pertain to this program. Possible motives of potential NHI. While humanity could never discern a comprehensive understanding regarding the actual motives of any non-human intelligence, that does not mean we shouldn't speculate, provided there is any possibility of them existing in our presence. If they are here, what do they want? Where do we fit into their agenda? Are they benign, malevolent, indifferent, or all of the above? Even basic answers to these questions, of course, depend on their point of origin. If they are extraterrestrial, as opposed to us from the future, their motives are going to be quite different just by the nature of their origin. An interdimensional being would have vastly different, likely incomprehensible motives compared to an ancient civilization from Earth that evolved millions of years before we did. Top 10 Guide for Notable UFO Community Members and Media. This episode will basically be a resource guide for discovering influential members of the UFO community, podcast and YouTube channels that I subscribe to, the best reference databases, and some of the foremost documentaries and must-read books relating to the subject matter. This episode will be one of the few that features an actual opinion, as the guide I compile will be based on what I think are the best resources for generating interest in the topic and helping to solve the mystery. I may also sprinkle in a few live AMAs or Ask Me Anything episodes. In conclusion, other topics covered through the unique lens of this program will include the role of the military, government and private contractors, the media's involvement, conspiracy theories, the big picture, a happy medium approach, and much more. At some point, I may produce an additional channel that discusses current events while incorporating the tenets and methods outlined in this one. I would basically apply the same methodologies I've devised for each particular case, witness, video, and more. Or I may transition to that format once I've exhausted all the topics that will be covered in the book. I also plan to eventually host what Kurt Jaimungal on his podcast Theories of Everything calls Theolocutions, where I act as a moderator featuring two guests at a time with opposing views to the phenomenon or who have had public disagreements. That will basically coerce them into at least extending an olive branch. I aim to find common ground among the various personalities in the field in order to promote positive discourse going forward and to highlight that, when it comes down to it, we're all on the same side with the same basic goal: to promote public awareness and be taken seriously by the scientific and skeptical communities. Again, please visit uapasnhi.com, that's uapasnhi.com, for updates, forthcoming merchandise, and to get the conversation started in the member forum. We are the ones with the drive to help make the UFO community a more positive and productive place. We simply need a more structured, consistent, and comprehensive approach that works for everyone in the community. What we've seen over the years hasn't really worked as far as a standard method of approaching the topic, so it's past time to change the narrative and get everyone on board. I was initially a bit too ambitious in thinking I would have the time to produce an episode every week. Between working full-time, putting episodes together, and having any semblance of a life, I'm forced to produce an episode either bi-weekly or monthly at the latest. While this could change in the future, my current situation will not permit me to produce one every week. An extensive amount of work goes into conceptualizing, writing, recording, editing, and then uploading a show. So while the podcast may not be a weekly occurrence, it will nonetheless be a consistent program with a new episode uploaded every month at the very latest. Episode 2, The 10 Rules of Engagement in Ufology, will release in 2 weeks. I will eventually initiate a Patreon campaign with select merchandise provided for different tiers. Be sure to like and subscribe to help the channel grow so that I can get the message out to a broader audience. Thanks so much for your support. I will end the show with a quote, as I will for all future episodes. The following was made by astrophysicist Bernard Heisch on ufoskeptic.org. Quote, I propose that true skepticism is called for today, neither the gullible acceptance of true belief, nor the close-minded rejection of the scoffer masquerading as the skeptic. One should be skeptical of both the believers and the scoffers. The negative claims of pseudo-skeptics who offer facile explanations must themselves be subject to criticism. If a competent witness reports having seen something tens of degrees of arc in size, as happens, and the scoffer, who of course was not there, offers Venus or a high-altitude weather balloon as an explanation, the requirement of extraordinary proof for an extraordinary claim falls on the proffered negative claim as well. That kind of approach is also pseudoscience. Moreover, just being a scientist confers neither necessary expertise nor sufficient knowledge. I wish it did. Sigh. Any scientist who has not read a few serious books and articles presenting actual UFO evidence should, out of intellectual honesty, refrain from making scientific pronouncements. To look at the evidence and go away unconvinced is one thing. To not look at the evidence and be convinced against it, nonetheless, is another.